people like David Burdock this thing through, but he's done a phenomenal job. He used to be with the State Attorney General's office. I worked with him 20 years ago on a couple big issues, constitutional issues, and we had some good victories there, and he's just done phenomenal things, and so I don't think I need to go into any more detail, but David, what do you think?
Thank you. Thank you for that, David. Can we dim the lights a little so I can show my PowerPoint presentation that cost?
I'll get it.
Can you see through my head?
Right there. Perfect.
There we go.
Okay, so I made a guess, but I'm lead counsel for the lawyers that are fighting this phosphorus problem in Florida. This is an image of what it looks like. What our problem is inadequately treated sewage, animal manure, and fertilizer pollution getting into the water. See if I can make this work. I'll turn it on.
Well, that's good.
I'll push the button.
Okay, all right. Yes. And we had, what triggered this was, we all know there was a massive toxic algae outbreak that came from Lake Okeechobee. This is not actually the St. Lucie, this was actually, that's what it looked like. And that really got things going. The algae here was extraordinarily toxic. And human contact with the St. Lucie was unsafe. Your dog got into the water and licked its fur, your dog died in 2 hours. The dogs drank the water, they died. People got into the water, they got rashes all over them. This is extremely dangerous. And what ultimately happened was the Rivers Coalition had a takings case against the Corps of Engineers. That's an image of SAE, the water moving from the canal through into the St. Lucie River. And there's my image of a takings case, and the theory is that the Corps of Engineers had taken the property rights of the riparian owners, the people along the river, because under Florida law, you have a property right to a waterfront boundary that's free of pollution. And we know it wasn't free of pollution. It was the dirtiest, nastiest, most dangerous stuff that God ever saw. And when somebody takes your property rights by any means, and it's the government, you have a right under the 5th Amendment to the Constitution to compensation, to make them stop or to have compensation. And this was a takings case saying you took our property rights to a clean, safe water line to be free of pollution. And it was a good case. It was brought by one of the best experts in the United States on takings cases. It was a little on the innovative side, but what ultimately happened? Sorry. Is it ended up in the United States Court of Claims in Washington, D.C. This is actually the Court of Claims, what a lovely courthouse. And what ultimately happened was that it went to very extensive briefing and arguments in the Federal Court of Claims. The Court of Claims is the court for the United States where when you have a claim against the government for compensation, that's the court that hears it. And this was a really, really important case because the concept is that when you take polluted water and you put it against the property of another person, you really are taking their property rights. And what's happening is that the polluters are getting a free ride. They're getting to use your property to dispose of their contaminants. Just exactly the same as if your next door neighbor is taking their bags of garbage every Sunday and throwing them over your fence. you get this, onto your property. It's no different than that, and when the federal government does that, they have to pay. And if what happened is this case had been able to establish the precedent that polluters and their government allies lacked the authority to impose that cost on waterfront landowners, and they had to pay the honest cost, things would fundamentally change. It was a brilliantly conceived case. It got to the Court of Claims, but what happened was the case was barred by the statute of limitations. And it's a real shame, because to me that really doesn't make any sense, because if you think, the explanation was this has been going on for so long that it's barred by the statute of limitations. And the problem is that if you are a landowner and your next door neighbor on Sunday morning throws their garbage bags over the fence, it doesn't feel like the statute of limitations is run on Sunday morning when you see the bag flipping over the fence. So how did they get there? Well, I'm not gonna say what anatomical part they had their hands up, because that presentation was so long. So that didn't work out. So what happened ultimately is it triggered a whole generic lawsuit that we brought in 2008. That case was brought in 2006, and it really brought it to our attention. The St. Lucie River was ground zero for the toxic slime problem throughout the state of Florida. It got our attention, it got the attention of our clients, and we decided to try to get a grip on it by setting discrete limits on the pollutants, inadequately treated sewage, manure, and fertilizer. We saw that a lot of it was toxic, and it's a problem throughout the whole state. It poisons drinking water. This is the older drinking water plant that had to be shut down because of the toxic algae, that's microcystin there that you're seeing, that was poisoning the intake water. And this is not unique to pollution. Actually, there's a large number of surface water intake structures around the state, and many of them are threatened periodically. The safety of the water periodically. That algae outbreak, like the one that came here, came from Lake Okeechobee, and this is an illustration of how serious this is. This is a gentleman who was on the Little Wakaiba River. He came into contact with a log. He was helping somebody out that whose canoe had flipped over, and he got next to a log. He was fully dressed. He got totally soaked. And when he got out of the water, every single part of his body that had been in the water that wasn't covered with clothes, he had a rash on one thing. That rash is 2.5 weeks old, and it's down to a third of what it was before. And this is happening all over the state. It happens in developing countries too. And as a consequence, there's aquatic toxins hotline, and they're all over the state too. Where when you see a toxic algae outbreak, 80%, it turns out, of algae outbreaks are actually toxic, with microcystin, as it turns out. So this stuff is really dangerous, and this is happening all over the state. As you can see here, they destroyed property values. In our case, one of the things we showed was that on the St. Lucie River alone, there was a permanent decline of $500 million in property values. That's happening all over the state. Now, look, you can imagine owning a condo up there and having the water look like that, what your property value would be like. And this is red tide. And red tide is also fueled by these same pollutants, and they're causing this huge problem all over everywhere. It's destroying, and many times, the tourist economy, most of which is on the coast. And tourism, of course, as we all know, is essential to our economy. So the problem is that the Florida standards is a narrative standard. Don't add so much fertilizer, that is phosphorus and nitrogen, that it causes an imbalance in naturally occurring flora and fauna. That's the narrative standard. What it means is don't put too much in. And what too much in means it turns everything slime green, which is like saying don't drive so fast that you get into a car accident from driving too fast, and you'll know you were driving too fast when you roll your car. What kind of speed limit is that? And that's what this is. So we need speed limits. So the problem is that the Clean Water Act is implemented by the states with federal oversight. And now I'm a little sarcastic in this this image, because, the suggestion is from this, and the suggestion that people have about the federalism idea, is that the folks from DEP really don't know what they're doing, and that you have to have the feds telling them what to do, because they don't have it together, like Marty Fife doesn't have it together. But that really isn't what's happening at all. What's really happening is the best scientists actually are in the state. Certainly, Florida have extraordinarily good scientists. There's no doubt about that. The very best. But what's happening is not that they have to be supervised because they're not good enough. The problem is that interest groups that are so powerful in Florida, polluting industries, have so much political heft that without the backup of EPA, they'll go down every time. And what actually brought the Clean Water Act into existence in the first place is a perfect illustration of that. The states had the authority to, and the obligation to protect water bodies from pollution. But what happened was that the state of Ohio was in charge of keeping the rivers clean, and the Cuyahoga River caught fire, which is a suggestion that they may not have been doing an adequate job. And so that's the reason why you have federal oversight, is the extraordinary political influence of polluting industries within states. And that's the reason there's that relationship there. We filed a case in 1998, I don't want to bore you on this. Basically what we said is that the EPA had previously decided that you just can't have a narrative that says don't screw up. You have to have limits just like the speed limit. And what happened was that after some pretty intense pretrial skirmishing, EPA, the Bush EPA went down. Fortunately, they settled the case essentially, and it said, you know, you're absolutely right. We just can't have this narrative anymore. We really need to have speed limits, and that's Benjamin Grumbles from the Bush administration that made that determination. And what happened was Florida knew well that that was right. And so Mike Soul specifically endorsed it through a press release in 2009 and said, we need these, and this is absolutely right. It was done in coordination with EPA. And you know, that's something that's been, you know, obscured over time, but this was a joint idea with our Republican DEP and the Republican EPA. We ended up with a settlement with EPA after some pretty intense bargaining, and which took months and months and months. We ended up with a deal, but the consequence was that if the deal was basically that if DEP can't take on the polluters and establish some good standards in 15 months, EPA will have to step in. You can see there's the polluters up sideways in there, and that's DEP taking it, and that's EPA in the back getting ready to step in as a tag team. The consequence was an explosion of political attacks on this idea. The idea of putting limits on these pollutants was invoking the wrath of the most powerful industries in Florida. And it was, I have never in my entire career, which spans 30 years, ever seen anything like this in terms of a reaction to something pretty wonky, which is setting, you know, pollution limits.